Well, several years ago, I began my internship at St. Patrick in Parnell. And so I was a seminarian, and I was sent there, and I arrived, and the pastor looked at me and he said, "Stephen, what are you most nervous about?" And I said, "Funerals. Funerals." And he just says, "Well, why funerals?" I said, "Death is hard. I don't know what to say. I don't know if I'll know what to say." Well, as luck would have it, in those first 2 weeks, we had 8 funerals. We had 3 the first week and 5 the second. So at the end of the second week, and we've had all these funerals, and I've certainly been thrown into baptism by fire, right? And we're eating chips and salsa because we both love chips and salsa. And he just had this exhausted look on his face. And he just looks at me and says, "Hey man, are you nervous about anything else?" I said, "I don't think so. I think we're good to go now." Oh, it was too funny. But death is hard, isn't it? Death is hard. I was preparing for this homily, and I came across this quote from Andy Rooney. You know who Andy Rooney is? Who knows who Andy Rooney is? Yeah, that's what I expected. No youth. I didn't know who Andy Rooney was before this weekend either, okay? I had no idea who he was. And so, for those who don't know, Andy Rooney was, I think 60 Minutes was his claim to fame. At the very end of 60 Minutes, there's these moments or these words with Andy Rooney. Well, Andy Rooney, at the end of his life, when he was, I think, retiring, and he was sharing one of his last reflections, and he was asked to reflect on his life. And he said, "I have lived a good life. I'm grateful for my life. I look back on it. I have a wonderful wife. I have wonderful children. I've got great-grandchildren." And then he said, "I don't know if they're great because they're not old enough yet, but I have great-grandchildren." Which, if you know Andy Rooney, that kind of sounds like him, doesn't it? I don't know if they're great. He's kind of a curmudgeon. Kind of snarky, a little whiny, but I think that's what made him famous. Anyway, but the next thing that he said I found very interesting. "I'm getting older, and I think about death 10 times a day, and I'm terrified of death." And then he said, "We have got to do something about this death thing." Well, I learned later, as I went kind of try to learn more about him, that he actually is an atheist. And he didn't talk about it in 60 Minutes, but he didn't hide it either. He didn't believe in God. And when you think about it that way, it's like, wow, you know what? It's not surprising. Not surprising that death would terrify him. Because what's next? This is it. This is the end. And so I thought, what a sad place to be. But I think after this last year, I had someone come out after last Mass say, "Father, I feel like Andy. I thought your homily really helped me." And I said, I felt like Andy this year too, because COVID made me really think about my mortality. And I think in a certain sense, we've all thought of death at different points in our lives. Well, there's this beautiful moment in the Gospels. It wasn't our Gospel this morning, but it's one of my favorites. It's Jesus and Lazarus, when Jesus raises Lazarus from the dead. And it's interesting to kind of go through the whole story. At the beginning, Jesus has friends who come to him and say, "Jesus, Lazarus is sick." And what does Jesus do? He stays in the town for 2 more days. Wouldn't you think that if you heard a close friend of yours was sick, you would immediately go, right? You would immediately go, and that's what we've been accustomed to with Jesus, that once he hears someone suffering, he goes immediately to them. But for some reason, he stays. As my mom would say, he lollygags around, right? Well, then his friends say, "Hey, Lazarus is sick, let's go." And this is his response. So then Jesus says to them, Lazarus has died, and I am glad for you that I was not there. He's glad for them that he wasn't there, that you may believe. Jesus is obviously preparing them for something, that you may believe. I'm glad that I wasn't there. I'm glad Lazarus died, so that you may believe. Then he goes to the town. He's at the outskirts of the town, and Mary comes running to him. Mary, Lazarus' sister. And she comes to him, and you hear this pain, the grief, and the anger, all of the above in her voice. And she says to Jesus, Lord, if you were here, my brother would not have died. Lord, if you were here, my brother would not have died. And then, of course, Jesus goes into the town, and the other sister comes, Martha, goes to Jesus and says, Lord, if you had been here, he would not have died. And I think this is where we all relate. When death happens, we wonder, where's God? Why didn't God care? Why did this person have to die? Right? All those questions of why come up. And then we move on. And Jesus says, your brother will rise. Your brother will rise. And as we know, the end of the story is Jesus does indeed raise Lazarus from the dead, so that everyone who believes in him, this is what he says, I am the resurrection and the life. Whoever believes in me, even if he dies, will live. And everyone who lives and believes in me will never die. Why did Jesus allow Lazarus to die in that moment? Because he wanted to show that he had power over death. But he wanted to do something even more. You know, I think we learn something if we ask ourselves the question, why would Jesus raise Lazarus from the dead? What was the motive? Was it just that he loved him? Right, there's that beautiful moment when he gets to the tomb before he raises Lazarus from the dead, and that beautiful verse, and Jesus wept. And Jesus wept. And then all the people around say, see how he loved him. See how Christ loved him. I don't think it's just Jesus' love for Lazarus that motivated him to raise him from the dead. I think it's something more. And you might be wondering, what could be more than love? I think that the thing that's more about it is friendship. The reason Christ raised him from the dead was friendship. Because Jesus loved Lazarus, and Lazarus loved him. And so now when we ask ourselves this question, why is death a thing? What are we going to do about that death thing, says Andy Rooney. What are we going to do about it? We look to our Lord. Why did Jesus have to die? Why did Jesus have to die? You know, as we hear in our gospel this morning, unless a grain or wheat falls to the ground and dies, it will not bear fruit. All of this to signify the death that he will undergo. Why did our Lord have to die? Why did that have to happen? Because he wanted to show that he had power over death. Jesus died, quite simply, so he could rise. Jesus died so he could rise. And the reason he died in order to rise was so that we too would believe that just as he raised Lazarus, he would raise us. And why? Why would he do that? Why would Jesus raise us to life? For the same reason. Because of friendship. Because he loves us. Christ loves us so much that he doesn't want this friendship to end. He doesn't want this life to be the end. And as we profess as Christians, life is changed when we die, but not ended. That Christ promises us that great, beautiful truth, that we will rise again and live with our God forever in friendship with him in heaven. Because he loves us.